Kia ora koutou, people. We are now live streaming. Oh. Can you mute the chambers? Oh. Queenstown, over to you.
Have you got us, Queenstown?
You want us to go now?
Yeah, we've got you. And, yeah.
Yes. Just hold there. Good afternoon, Michael. Thank you very much for popping along. We will give you a wee buzzer at about 4 minutes, and then another one after another minute, about 5 minutes, and then open it up for questions. So okay. Thanks very much. The floor is yours.
Okay, thank you for listening to me this afternoon. I'd like to present my concerns about the Lake Hayes remediation and the pause in the air pollution remediation program for the Arrowtown airshed. In regard to Lake Hayes, I agree that the lake requires remediation, although I am not familiar with the proposed remediation plan. I believe the polluters should pay as a normal practice in industry. I also consider that the ORC have an involvement in not imposing higher discharge standards on polluters in the past. So, in the past, ORC could have imposed high discharge standards for runoff into the lake. It has been mooted that the Arrowtown River water may be used to flush the nutrients from the lake. This is not acceptable to me. It is not environmentally ethical to use relatively high quality water to dilute the pollutants in the lake and flush them in the Quora River and onto Cromwell and Lake Dunstan. I prefer an in-lake solution to inactivate the phosphate after all current runoffs are appropriately controlled. And in regard to the possible use of Arrowtown River water, I don't think the financial impact statement considered the impact on the cost of the Arrow River of diverting this water. So, I don't think it's a good practice to, diluting pollution. In regard to the particular pollutants in the Arrowtown airshed,
can I please pop those up
during winter months, it is being reported by NIWA as the worst in New Zealand. So the levels of PM10 in Arrowtown have been reported to be the worst in New Zealand. And, I think this has been known for several years. The Otago Regional Council's monitoring site supports this. The air quality for PM10 exceeds the New Zealand air quality standard on numerous occasions. The PM10 arises from the combustion of wood. Under the RMA, the ORC are required to address air quality under the Resource Management Act and the Clean Air Standards. And clean air is one of the basic human rights. It is well established that PM10 and PM2.5 more specifically, and probably most of the PM10 is PM2.5, which is 2.5 microns, which I'm sure people will understand, has a detrimental effect on respiratory and cardiovascular health. The effect is more pronounced in young children and older people. It has been established that life expectancy is shortened. The chemicals in wood smoke are also carcinogenic, polyaromatic hydrocarbons. I could have given a lot more detail on this, but I think that I've only got 5 minutes. The Otago Regional Council is, in my opinion, neglecting its statutory responsibility by not addressing the poor air quality in the Arrowtown airshed. pausing it, I don't think so. The answer. It has already had ample opportunity to address the issue. And, you know, it's been known, I think, by NIWA since about the 2000s. In not addressing the issue, I'll ask the bill.
Yeah, that was
in not addressing the issue, the RRC is ignoring the health effects on residents. I'm surprised that the Public Health Authority has not taken this issue up, although I think maybe there are through these submissions. I would also venture to suggest that the semi-employed people in our town, in some places, will be exposed to PM 2.5 that exceed the workplace exposure standards. And that's in particular regard to polyaromatic hydrocarbons. Now, if that is the case, workplace safety would have an interest in that, or should have an interest. It is also known that the combustion of wood produces dioxins. I suggest that either the Ministry for the Environment or the Ministry of Health should be contacted to start a new study on dioxin concentrations in the yeah, that's fine. Thank you.
Any questions? Yeah, go Alexa.
Okay, Michael, just thinking about your submission around carbon and saying there's a lot of other elements to be considered rather than carbon. And we're pretty familiar with carbon accounting. How do we account for other elements? Are there known frameworks to do that?
There's life cycle analysis, which I think is being done, but it's very intricate and so on. But you can do that. People are doing that. They're doing it for products more than anything else. But I don't think in New Zealand, I think we need to concentrate on product stewardship. And for example, I think in my submission, I used the example of an electric car and lithium batteries. And currently, I don't think lithium batteries can be exported from New Zealand. And so if something isn't done about that, we're going to have a lot of used lithium car batteries and no market. I am aware that the scrap metal industry has been looking at it, but they can't ship them because of the shipping regulations.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Michael, thank you very much for taking the time to put a submission in, and also thank you very much for coming today, and your thoughts will be considered. Thank you.
I understand what Arrowtown Village Association ready in Queenstown, Sustainable Glenorchy are not there yet. So hopefully they'll...
Well, we'll sneak down to Arrowtown before we go up to Glenorchy.
Yeah. So that's page 30 of the book 2, which is the 410 page submission booklet.
In your hands, Kevin.
Is it just one note?
Yep. You there? Good.
Yeah, you ready for us?
Yeah, we'll all go. Look, thank you very much, Arrowtown Village Association. I'll just leave it to you to introduce yourself. We will give you a bell after about 7 minutes and then a further one to wind up by 8 minutes, and then we'll have some questions. You don't have to extend to that full time if you don't wish, but the floor is yours. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you very much. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and councillors present.
I'm Susan Rowley, representing the Arrowtown Village Association. I'd like to focus mostly from our submission on the air quality issue. And in doing so, I would like to refer to what I believe is your current air quality strategy for Otago. Otago, clean air everywhere. Now you say, this strategy revisits ORC's approach to effectively address air quality issues and ensure that air is safe to breathe for everyone and at any time in Otago. You give a guiding principle to be community-centred, the desired outcome of cleaner heating. In your context, you say the air quality in Otago is very good most of the year. However, sometimes throughout winter, in Arrowtown experiences high levels of particulate matter when chimney emissions peak. And of course, this affects, you say it affects respiratory and cardiovascular health. To achieve your outcome of cleaner heating, you will support local communities by involving local communities in developing tailored programs for good air quality, providing information on air quality issues and good practices, providing financial support to assist with the transition towards cleaner heating, improved energy efficiency and home insulation. You give a key issue of home heating smoke emissions are the source of most of our air pollution. In effect, you offer, as you say, you can achieve clean air throughout Otago if cleaner heating options are widely adopted in your communities. You give a desired outcome to adopt cleaner heating. You offer a short to medium term goal that you want to support our communities, your communities, to reduce the emissions coming from current heating to levels that are as low as possible. In your long-term goal, you want to help your communities move towards using low-impact heating so health guidelines are met. In delivering good air quality, a community-centred ORC will engage local communities in finding practical solutions, harness the community's pride and energy, support communities and individuals to reduce pollution. ORC's vision for air quality has several outcomes. In outcome 1, you say no smelly or smoky chimneys. You will focus your efforts on the problem areas, like polluted areas and offensive emissions, and support people to reduce their emissions. You will do this by working alongside community groups, agencies and local councils to offer effective assistance. You will develop local air quality programs in areas with air pollution issues. Programs will combine and align, for one example, education, information and rule enforcement activities. Involve the local community, local councils in designing solutions tailored to their communities. Upgrades to low impact heating. ORC will support transition to low impact heating by doing such things as, just brief here, promoting upgrades to low impact heating through information, education and targeted financial assistance. ORC will work with other regional councils, with central government and with industries. Low impact heating in all new homes. You will work with local councils and central government to ensure the legislation is consistent and requires low impact heating to be installed in all new homes, especially in problem areas. Now, this all makes very good sense to people who live in Arrowtown, and we can't understand why you are choosing not to develop this strategy. I also noticed that there is no list of ORC-approved solid fuel burners on your website. Readers are referred to a Ministry for the Environment list, but there is no indication of ultra-low emission burners or suitability for Arrowtown in the Airshed 1 zone. So now, referring back, what has happened to harnessing the community's pride and energy? You can be assured that Arrowtown is full of this. What will be the effect of withdrawing your support to help our community reduce its air pollution? I'm not going to answer that, I'm leaving that for you. I know it will be immense. Arrowtown Village Association asks you to at least keep outcome 1, cleaner heating, in your strategy. 2026 is simply too long to wait for tangible solutions. I know you'll say you'll start consulting with the community 23, 25, and then by 25 there'll be a plan forward, but that won't be implemented until 2026. We're only in 2021. That's 5 whole years lost for Arrowtown. Just a quick address to our submission on the public transport, which I think is fairly straightforward. I'll just speak to 2 points there. Our community would benefit from a bus route that either travels through Arthur's Point or connects to another bus in Arthur's Point within a short time frame. People who travel to Queenstown for work find the current route through Frankton too long, with many withdrawing their support. And second point, that although not mentioned here in our submission, this submission, we have submitted in the Transport Long-Term Plan on an amendment to the bus route through Arrowtown to be one circuit of Arrowtown, rather than doubling back. This would save both time and emissions to our already poor air quality. That's something that I know previous chairperson corresponded with at length, I believe, with ORC. Look, it's still on the agenda. That's all I have to say. I'm happy to answer any questions or clarify anything.
Thank you, Susan. Any questions, councillors? Yeah, Councillor Scott.
Can I hear?
Yes,
great.
You're right.
How has the progress been in Arrowtown in relation to air quality? We have put a certain amount of work there over the years. Were we making headway? What is causing the air pollution? Have we got rid of all the coal burning, or where is it at? Why isn't the community doing something?
Where's the emission coming from? I haven't turning off my own timer, sorry.
Haven't got rid of the coal burners.
Oh yeah, I think we've got rid of the coal burners. Mostly, look, that's I know you've got an enhanced monitor. Now, hopefully they'll be picking out. When we walk around Arrowtown, we don't smell the smoke. Don't smell coal the same. I've just been in Kaka Point for a few days. Smell a lot of coal there. Don't necessarily get that the same in Arrowtown. But on a positive note, people who have, I know 2 people closely who have used the subsidy that you offered to upgrade their fires, and they are both very pleased with the outcome. They are finding that they're using less fuel for to get a better heat, and that's a really good thing. Also, one of those has put in a heat pump to actually, as well as using the ORC subsidy for the fire, they put in a heat pump so that they can, and they live down in this bad zone down below, just below Centennial Ave. I think if you were to consult with Mitre 10, you would find that they are finding the same, that the people who have taken up the subsidy and put in compliant burners, that they're getting a good result and they're very happy. But this actually raises a point about the non-compliant burners. So we've got to work out what we're going to do about this. And Arrowtown Village Association is very keen. Look, we've got that pride and energy that we were talking about a moment ago, that we're happy to work together as a community to do something. We don't want to wait to do this. Everything has been built up. We've been working with NIWA. I've been on the committee for a few years now with NIWA through the Arrowtown Village Association. And we just get to a good point where things might be possible to be improved, and you pull the rug out from under our feet.
Gotcha. and understanding.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? Susan, thanks very much indeed for your work that you're doing with the association. Thanks very much for taking the time to make a submission, and we'll give that our consideration. Thank you indeed.
Thank you, and thank you for consideration as well.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alex.
We should have.
Well, we were expecting sustainable Glenorchy in Queenstown.
Yeah, but they're not here.
No one here yet?
So we assume no show.
Well, I would assume that, and
Do you want to bring on?
we're just contacting trying to call the next people to see, because there's no one waiting on Zoom.
Yep.
So we're trying.
We're just a bit early, are we? Yep.
Slightly early, and we haven't managed to get a hold of Central Otago Wild and Conifer Group. We're trying Fraser McKenzie to see if he can join a bit earlier. So I think we'll might just mute our mics, and we'll hopefully have someone shortly.
Thank you.
Okay, we've got Gary Johnson and
not enough. There's nothing off
Philip Murray. I think we'll Gary now, because we've just asked him to join.
Just hold one tick, and we'll get.
bet. I've just got
that's-
resilience.
People, we're going
I've just
to
got resilience.
We're
people-
back on.
we're going to Gary Johnson, page 650.
Gary's joining us.
Gary Johnson ago, I wasn't sure which one it was.
Yeah. Oh, so he's going to be on Zoom.
Yeah, he's with us now.
Just one moment, Gary. I'm just flicking to your submission.
Okay.
Got it.
Wonderful.
Very good. All set?
Yep.
Good. Good afternoon, Gary, and thanks for taking your time to be part of the submission process. Very much appreciated. We're giving 5 minutes, so we'll give you a wee bell at about 4 minutes, and then a wind-up bell at 5 minutes, and then give you a good time for questions and answer time after that. So feel free and take it as your submission is being read, and we look forward to hearing your contribution. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure I'll take 5 minutes. You have read my submission, and the reason that I put pen to paper was I had been bombarded with advertisements, etc., through various social media going, have your say, and I duly ignored those. But then I was in a supermarket and was able to pick up a hard copy of the document, and when I opened it and read it, I was completely surprised by its content. And by that, I mean, really, the cover says, have your say on our future. But the document really talks about how various things are going to be funded. And it was really a choice on, to pick A, B, or C on how this thing is going to be funded, but very little content as to what was actually going to be done. And I would take page 16 as an example, funding for rehabilitation of Lake Hayes. And it talks about where the Lake Hayes problem came from, some of the historical reasons for phosphate buildup and buildup in the sediments, and how that contributes to bloom, algal bloom under certain weather conditions. And so we go across onto page 17, and it talks about some important considerations that are made in developing this proposal. They include scale of the work. It is likely to be large, involving infrastructure requiring ongoing maintenance. Estimated at $3.5 million over 10 years. There's really, what can I say about that in terms of what's the work that's going to be done? What's the $3.5 million going to be used on? The words are the scale of the work. It's going to be large. Well, it's very difficult to contribute when you've got no idea what the plan is and what work is going to be done. And I think that theme goes through the entire document in terms of the various options, and they're spoken about what's going to happen in very generic terms. And then there's quite a detailed list of tables, etc., on how these things are going to be funded. So the document is really all about funding, even though the quantum of the funding has been decided. This is really all about how it's going to be divided up and how it's going to be cut up in the short term, in 1 or 2 years, or over 3 years, or something like that. So I was completely flabbergasted by the document, in that it provides no forum for contributing to the technical and real work that the ORC is going to do over the next 10 years. And I think that's really all I need to say.
Sorry. Yep.
I think you make an excellent point saying we're not telling you enough about what so much as how we're going to raise the funds. Would you like to have seen a longer document or a more targeted on what we propose to spend the money on document? I mean, have we got more than enough in some areas and then less than enough detail in others?
Well, there's very little detail. Sorry, I'm getting angry.
Yeah. So would you have liked a longer document with more detail, or is there some things you'd have thought we didn't need in there?
No, I dug down into some of the reference documents that were accessible, and even there I found them to be quite shallow in terms of content, and some of the budgets I found, having been in business for many years, budgets typically, if you have professional people working in an organisation, they tend to spend 2 or 3 or 5 times as much as their salary every year in doing things. And that's a good thing. That's what you all want those people to do. And yet when I looked into the more detailed budgets, it was staffing and salaries took up the vast majority of the expenditures, and there was nothing left to sort of spend it on doing things. So that's where I just don't understand what the ORC is going to do. There's just no detail on what actually is going to be done.
Thank you.
Councillor Scott.
I accept your point, so I'm not arguing with you. I agree we need an extra layer of detail, but as a matter of interest, if the council had said that there was an option of putting water through Lake Hayes and diluting it and pushing it through the culvert, or putting a chemical in, or dredging, or putting a chemical in to encapsulate the phosphate, or putting a layer of something to encapsulate the sediment, what would you have said? What would you and others have said about that?
I'd want to see the technical rationale behind it. You know, I'm completely capable of understanding.
I said you and others. I said you and others. You know, so then it becomes this technical debate. Are we the best?
The solution will be technical. If it's not technical, then it's not a solution. You want to fix that phosphate or do something with it. So therefore, something actually has to be done. And what is that? And it's left as a significant cost with no detail on what that is. And so I've still to this point now, I've got no idea what you're going to do. Going to send little frogmen down there to pick up the phosphate, or dredge it out, or whatever. I don't know. Yeah, but it's still a lot of money.
Any further questions? Mr. Johnson, the devil is in the detail.
Hold on.
And here's a question.
Yeah, it's quite tricky. I don't disagree with you at all. And I've actually been having a conversation with our finance manager here all day about how we try and get this detail to people. And as he rightly points out, the decision on what we're going to do about Lake Hayes was made earlier. This is just the funding part of it. What do you think might be a way to engage people like you who want to get engaged but may not have been part of the entire process that's been painfully ongoing for some years? How do we bring you in at this point?
I mean, I'm sure there are. You have references and you have documents and things that have been created, and a pathway to finding those would be certainly useful. I don't, there's documents sitting at, what is it, 40 odd pages? 36 pages is more than long enough for anyone to try and digest. There's no doubt about that. But the underlying thing is it inflates over 10 years quite significantly, certainly more than CPI would suggest it should. And again, there's a lack of detail as to why it's inflating. There's references to, the central government giving directives, etc., but they're not very well outlined. So I think we need to get away from the sort of the nice words and get down to the detail of what's going on. Like Lake Hayes, if there has been a decision as to what's going to be done, then that should have been up in front, front and centre of that 3 pages of discussion on Lake Hayes. We are going to do this, and it will result in this, and it's going to cost that much, and the maintenance of that over 10 years will be this. Pretty straightforward.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Thank you, Mr. Johnson. Much appreciated, and that will definitely give us some very strong thinking to do. Thank you for your time.
And
much appreciated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Now we do have Central Otago Wilding Conifer Group ready. We've got Philip Murray in the waiting room. That's page 636 on booklet 1, the 950 page one. 636, and I'm just admitting him through to the meeting now.
Yeah, my finger.
That's Philip.
And he will be on Zoom.
On Zoom, yep. He's should be just connecting to the audio now. Hopefully he'll be able to.
You there, Philip? Not yet, no.
This is
You there, Philip? Zap him. Name Peter.
He's signed in as Philip Murray on.
Yeah, no, that's the contractor. Yeah.
Oh.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah. So it is actually. It's Peter. You there, Peter?
Right.
That's Philip.
Hey. That's Phil, isn't it? Peter Hoare wrote the submission.
He wrote the submission and Phil's talking to it.
Phil Murray.
Oh, it is Phil.
Yeah, it is Phil, isn't it?
Yeah.
Can you hear me?
Can you hear us?
Yes, that's great.
Perfect. We have communication.
Right, excellent. Do you want me to kick off?
Yeah, great. We'll give you a wee buzz after about 6 minutes, a wee bell, 7 minutes, and then we'll give you plenty of time for questions.
Right.
Thank you very much.
Okay, right. Okay. Firstly, we want to acknowledge and thank the Regional Council for recognising the problem of wilding pines as a significant threat to the economy and the natural heritage of the area, which we feel as though has come a long way from where we've been. Where we're at the moment, from a regional perspective, we have only just started. Even though from the Central Otago Group's point of view, feel as though we've been going for a while, since 2012, and we feel as though we are getting down off the big landscapes and got some level of control. But from a regional perspective, we feel as though we're a long way off. So the model that the Regional Council adopts to deal with this problem, which I think it's only just starting to get to grips with, as it is with the other pest problems, will be critical. And it'll be particularly critical, and the big test is when the money runs out. Just how resilient is the legacy that we're going to leave with the model that we've adopted. So we've got some major challenges in the wilding pines area, and they basically can be sort of wrapped into hearts and minds, attitude of the community, legal framework which businesses operate in and landowners operate in, and how we deal with these legacy plantings. And the legacy play, how we deal with those is very much wrapped up in the hearts and minds and the legal framework. So as a group, we advocate very strongly for a community-based approach for the planning and delivery. And when I say planning, I mean the planning with a small p. That's the local planning associated with delivery. And we are very strongly of the view that that's best done at a community-based level. And the reasons for that are that we believe that bottom-up approach is important because the community knows or should know what the nature of the problem is. And if they don't know what the nature of the problem is, and often they don't with rabbits and wildlings, that is best done by the community going, hey guys, we've got a problem here. Would you like us to help you? And that's supported by a legal framework where the conversation can go something like, if you don't do it and we don't help you to do it, you're going to have to do it at some time later anyway. And it's also seen as a community dealing with its own problems, which is always a positive place to start. And the third reason is that if the community addresses these problems, it does start part of a conversation in the community, a wider conversation about where we take this landscape, which we desperately need to have, because wilding pines are just a microcosm of one of the components of a whole landscape that's going somewhere. And we need to have a conversation about where we want to take this, and that leads into why we might be controlling wilding pines. So that's the important part, which I think the community group approach takes. Now, when I say we should be involved in the planning and delivery, there's ample room and there's a really important role for councils. And what we see the role of council is firstly funding assistance to community groups such as ours, and that funding particularly goes to staff. We at the moment we have got one staff at the moment, that's me, and we really do need to take another person on, similar to what Wakatipu has, because of the need to go out and see landowners and how that is really time demanding and quite expensive. So we would like to see the regional council up its funding from the 200k it provides at the moment to something near 500k for the whole region. That covers the whole region. So this funding is number one. Providing a strategic overview at a regional level is critical, and that's the planning with a big P. Because we're well aware that on our boundaries, and we touch on those boundaries and they do affect us, are some huge problems which probably don't immediately lend themselves to the community group approach, but it does eventually need to link into the community. And we've made some suggestions about how that can be done to the council staff. So it needs a strategic overview, planning overview. The third thing is providing a regulatory framework that supports the wilding pine control, and that's in the area of the regional pest management plan, which does recognise wilding pines and does get support, but we do find it's disappointing in that it does fall short of providing a very clear and firm direction for landowners, but and also forest owners and owners of shelter, pinus contorta shelter belts, which are a major problem. And also regional councils have got a part to play to lobby central government in the review of the NES plantation forestry. which is a major requirement. The fourth thing is monitoring and enforcement, and we see our group working with regional council staff, having conversations with the with landowners about what the rules are, and then in that light we provide them with help. And the fifth thing is information and advocacy. It's really important for the community to hear that the regional council thinks wildings are a problem, and to provide them with that view and provide them with some information. So that's basically our submission.
Councillors, any questions? Yeah. Councillor Scott?
It seems to me that if you've got a bunch of wilding pines and you let it go, you then turn into a carbon farm. Yeah? Are there any synergies between the two in terms of how they should be addressed or even approached by the government? I'm just trying to get my head around that. I think you said yes.
It's underpinned by the right tree in the right place. And at the moment, wilding pines can't be registered under the Carbon Act. So that isn't an avenue for people to go to with wild pines. However, that is why there's a real need for some strategic planning to work out where is the right tree in the right place and where do we take these things. So that's we're in dire need of having that conversation.
Yeah. Thank you.
Okay, so is it a battle that we can win?
Good question. If we get all the ducks in a row, yes, we can win it. And the thought and the consequences of not winning it are so catastrophic that I wouldn't like to imagine. It's very like climate change. It's one of those things that people won't believe what the consequences are. So we need to put a lot of effort into getting people to understand, like climate change scientists do, what the consequences are, so we don't have to go there before people will believe they're a problem. But I do believe, the answer to your question, I do believe we can, particularly in Central, I think we can win this battle.
Last, Councillor Wilson.
Phil, it'd be really helpful if you could send through any data you have about the problems of wilding trees. And I think you've done some interesting work around Naseby about dry water catchments.
Yeah.
You've got some research on that. Would you mind sending that through by email?
Yes. Okay. Well, and the other thing I'd like to mention in that vein is that there's been a bigger model just recently developed, which gives a really good visual picture of the what ifs for the various effects. So it can show you what if we did nothing, what effect would it have on water yield out of the Menehira, for example. And it's a great model, it's a great tool for demonstrating to the public what would happen if they do nothing.
I think it's probably a very good tool to government as well, if they don't change the NES.
Yes, exactly.
Phil, thanks very much indeed for your time. Thanks very much for the good work you're doing, and keep a positive note. It's a battle we'll just have to win. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks, guys.
Good as gold.
Cheers. Okay.
How are we going?
Good. We've got Fraser McKenzie.
All the way from Oamaru.
He's online.
Yep.
And followed by that we have got Shane and Jared over here in person. So Fraser is submission 509 in the larger submission booklet.
Page 509 of the 960, Fraser McKenzie, Waitaki Irrigators Collective Limited is our next submitter.
He should be on his way.
He's on his way. Mr. McKenzie.
Hello.
Fraser, yep. We have, we've allocated we'll give you a bell at 7 minutes. We'll give you another wee bell at 8 minutes, and then we'll have some question time. You don't need to use the whole 7 minutes if you don't want to. There will be no marks taken off if you don't. So feel free, and thanks very much for providing your time.
Yes, thank you for the opportunity. So I don't think I will require the full 7 to 8 minutes. It's a relatively short presentation, but it was really just to update the situation and the reality and support of the long-term plan for Otago. So just a brief introduction. I'm Fraser McKenzie, the independent chair of Waitaki Irrigators Collective Limited. It's been an organisation that was formed in 2010, and we represent some 580 irrigators covering 80,000 hectares who take water or apply water for irrigation below the Lower Waitaki Dam out to the sea. So from an Otago point of view, probably half of that area, 40,000 hectares, would sit within two of our members, Lower Waitaki Irrigation Scheme and North Otago Irrigation Company. Our overarching goal is surety of supply and reliability of supply. So when you think about what those two drivers for our organisation is, then the rest of this presentation will become relatively clear to you as to why we are interested. So the irrigation scheme is not just irrigation water. The Lower Waitaki Irrigation Scheme supplies water, for example, to the Pukuri Alliance Works at Pukuri. It supplies water to Oamaru through to the Waitaki District Council, and there are other sports clubs, etc. So it's not purely supplying water for irrigation of farmland. So you'll see there on page 2 of our submission, WIC supports the proposed provisions in the draft long-term plan for Otago. Firstly, the proposed activity and funding splits in relation to Waitaki River Management and the Lower Waitaki River Control Scheme. And secondly, proposed activities relating to land and water planning in Otago, being the development of collaborative integrated catchment action plans, targeted interventions in catchments, the development and notification of the new regional plan water, and land management advice. So just a little bit of background as to why we're talking about this today. So the hydrological functioning of the Waitaki River is critical to irrigation schemes within our membership. It's the vast majority of farmers and growers with properties adjacent to the Lower Waitaki River are in fact members of the Waitaki Irrigators Collective. We submit that the management of the fairway of the Lower Waitaki River is of critical importance. And again, although it is largely a function undertaken by Environment Canterbury, it's also of importance to the Otago community. So braided rivers are interesting. By their very nature, being braided, they can change course over time and shift. And most people accept that. Our infrastructure does accept that braided rivers move a lot. However, the two issues that really impact on that is where you have artificial flow control and insufficient fairway vegetation control, so insufficient management of the fairway. So you may think that, okay, if you've got a hydro scheme above you that you're under control, you're not going to get these massive floods and issues associated with high flows. But at the same time, what we do get is we get high flows for longer periods of time. So the hydro schemes are, when they are under pressure and have high lake levels, we end up getting high river flows for long periods of time, and those flows, particularly where we have a situation where there has been reduced vegetation control in the fairway, we end up with damage from those flows. So We've got given the examples in our submission of what happened in 2019 and 2020. So you may recall that, for example, in the Rangitata, there were massive flows, took out both highways that allowed access between north and south. We also experienced a similar situation, not with a very high flow, but with very long-term flows that went on for weeks. And there was a significant amount of damage was done to farmers both on the north bank and flooding on the south bank of the river. Over the years, probably the last 10 years or so, like millions of dollars has been lost due to land and infrastructure damage as a result of these A, sustained high flows, and B, some of the vegetation issues that have created islands within the river. So better fairway management would greatly reduce the effects of future flood events. So what we're really arguing, well, what we're saying is that the lower Waitaki River catchment is unique amongst the Canterbury and Otago rivers because of the hydro schemes. And on that basis, it is needing more active management and of the river. We looked at various reports that have come out over the years, and those reports generally tend to state that removal of vegetation from the fairway is the primary means of reducing the trend of braid reduction. So if you look at some of those rivers further up the South Island, braided rivers that don't have that hydro complex above them, they are very braided, multiple braids across the river. We're seeing ourselves with a limited number of braids. And again, when we get those long period of high flows, without that braiding, we're ending up with significant damage to the banks and potentially to our irrigation infrastructure. So if we look at the long-term plan, it talks about the scheme performance issues for the Lower Waitaki River Control Scheme. It talks about repeat floods, very dynamic river, managing of unplanned works, and for that reason, investment of the river fairway is more critical in the Waitaki than in other braided river catchments. It's critically important that the river management schemes continues to be funded to a sufficient level to ensure that the benefits that we obtain from the river can continue to be enjoyed by the whole community in North Otago. So we're thinking the Lower Waitaki is the largest East Coast braided rivers, and the level of work undertaken to manage it should be commensurate with its size. It's of significant importance to the wider community beyond just our membership and adjacent landowners, and this needs to be recognised in the funding split. In 2017, ORC undertook a review which confirmed that the benefits of the river management scheme accrues to a wider community, not just adjacent landowners. So we're supporting the fact that the council will contribute to the cost of river erosion work on private properties where a wider benefit is generated, and this will come 100% from the general rate, and that for the Lower Waitaki River Control Scheme, 10% will come from the general rate and 90% will come from the targeted rates on the scheme. And then finally, just to recognise, we recognise that the ORC has a significant amount of work coming through and under planning requirements under the essential freshwater package. And we would certainly be looking forward to working closely with the council in the development of these instruments, as well as supporting our members on the ground with the implementation of these instruments and associated regulations. So that's really where we're at. We're simply saying we're supportive of the plan and how it will fund work on the river. Definitely over time that funding has not been sufficient to maintain the fairway, and so it's quite critical going forward that there is sufficient funding to alleviate some of the issues that we've been experiencing over the last 12 months. Thank you.
Thank you, Fraser. Questions? Councillor Scott.
The OSC engaged Professor James Brasington to do some consultancy work over 10 years on the Darton and the Rees, and he came to, did a thesis, engaged different people. They came to the conclusion that a river needs to have the ability to be a river, to be able to breathe, to be able to move and so forth. Have you looked at the river from that perspective? I'm not trying to belittle, you're obviously, you've got some tensions, but have you looked at it from that perspective? Or how do you look at your river?
And I'm just, when you say that those reports were done and a river needs to be, trying to give me a little bit more detail in what that means.
Well, what it means is that the conclusion he's come to with the Dart and the Rees, you've got Glenorchy, and the reality is that the Dart and the Rees is going to go in places over time that they hadn't really expected. And that actually trying to fight that is a tough battle. And I'm just wondering on the Waitaki, I'm not trying to be smart, but
no, that's a good question.
What he really says is that the way we consider rivers is an old colonistic thinking. That's not me. That's what he said.
Yeah. So we totally understand that the Waitaki is a braided river, and a braided river will behave, and it's very difficult to predict what it's going to do. So you can expect that your infrastructure needs to be of a sufficient quality to actually withstand the challenges that a braided river brings. What the issue that we've identified on the Lower Waitaki and in our discussions with ECAN is the impact of having a hydro scheme above it is such that that behaviour of the river allows islands to become established. Once an island becomes established and trees, vegetation grows on those islands, you get to a point where you no longer technically have a braided river. Those islands, when the river is high, historically in somewhere like the Dart or the Rees, the river could flow over those islands and remove them and create new braids, for example. In this situation, you've got a river that is artificial in that these islands, the work has not been done to remove that vegetation and allow it to be a braided river. So if we go back to catchment board days, for example, there would be 2 bulldozers living in that river between the Lower Waitaki Dam and the sea, trying to maintain that braided nature and remove those islands and remove vegetation. That hasn't happened for a long period of time. So we do have a lot of trees and vegetation growing on these islands, which is exasperating the effects of it being a braided river. So you get an island and a river comes to it. The first thing it does, it hits that island, then it goes left or right and heads towards the bank. It doesn't flow over the island as it would in somewhere like the Dart or the Rees. So we're not saying we want to turn this into a canal. We're simply saying this needs to be some funding to ensure that some of the artificial or non-natural situations aren't continuing.
Councillor Deaker.
Yeah, Fraser, thank you. I take it from what you've said, and I took it from your submission actually, that what you're saying to us is that the Waitaki is such a modified river with a whole heap of hydro works extending away up west, that what you really want to see is a continuation of the vegetation management and the fairway management that ECAN and Otago have combined to do, but you want us to do it better.
I just think it's been a little bit underfunded over the years. So yes, we're not trying to change anything. We simply want it to be sufficient funding to maintain the fairway and control that vegetation, etc. And yeah, looking for something radical to happen. Yeah.
And Fraser, just Kevin Malcolm here. Would that be part of your submission towards consents to the hydro generator, which are due 2025? That there may be some greater support around that river management.
Yeah, like they are really, make significant contributions to the funding of that. Yeah, like it's quite likely that there will be some discussion around that. I wouldn't be surprised. But it is, the other thing we're saying is what we're supporting there, I suppose, is to say, okay, it's okay if those that are adjacent to the river fund a lot of that, but there is a much wider portion of the community that benefits from the river behaving you would expect from a natural river in terms of boating, fishing, etc. So there is a wider opportunity for that to make sure that that rate reflects those that benefit from the river.
Thank you. And Hilary, Councillor Calvert.
You're saying, I think, that Meridian, you're, if not happy with their contribution, you're saying they're making a significant contribution, and you're saying years ago that they used to have a couple of tractors permanently hanging around doing it.
No, sorry, that wasn't Meridian. That would have been back in the catchment. Yeah.
Oh, right, okay. So is there any reason why Meridian shouldn't, for the most part, fund this if it's fairly much directly caused, if it wouldn't be happening if it wasn't for the dam? On the but-for test, sort of, if it's for them to do, really, because they have caused its behaviour to be artificial, and therefore, if we're trying to return it to as much of the braided rivers that... Sorry, is that better? If it should return, I mean, we want it to be a braided river. It used to be a braided river. Now that it's got a dam near, it's got a tendency not to be for some reasons or another. Is there a reason why Meridian shouldn't essentially fund keeping it as a braided river?
Well, as I say, they are contributing. I suppose ultimately, if they had to contribute more, we would end up paying more for electricity, I suppose, in the end. It's a difficult one, that one, to say. Does it fall definitely on their on them, or is it just that the wider community that is making use of the river and is benefiting from it? It should be shared accordingly between the likes of Meridian, adjacent landowners, and the wider community.
We've had this discussion today about Lake Hayes. Should it be paid for by the people who might benefit from it being cleaner and more pristine, or should it be paid for by the people who caused it not to be? And so that's arguably, if somebody causes it not to be how it ought to be, you'd, usually sheet the whole thing home to them rather than just say, like if you've got wilding pines, do you charge the people who would like not to have them, or do you charge the people who had pine trees that did the wilding?
Yeah.
Is there any reason why Meridian shouldn't essentially pay for it?
I think to be fair in terms of funding, it needs to reflect those that are benefiting from use of the river or access to the river. So there is a wider rating base there, I think. Yeah.
Any further questions? Thank you, Fraser. Thanks for taking the time to put in a submission. Thanks for the time coming and talking to us today. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Shane
and Jared. Together? Yep. Is it? Is it? What day? No, don't say that then.
That mic is working.
Hi. Before you start, yes, very good idea.
Are we on, are we?
I'll just give you some rules. We'll give you a wee buzz after 6-7 minutes, and then another buzz at 8, and then that will give us time to have some questions. So feel free.
Thank you. Yeah, good afternoon. I'll just introduce Jared Dalley here with me today. I'm speaking on my own behalf, really. I've got a small company, Agri7 Limited, who do a wee bit of environmental advisory work and project management. I am a dairy farm overseer also. We're just about to complete a 2-year project on the Vallalese property, which is the creation of the Waipahi wetland. at Waipahi, which is a 9 hectare project, 5 hectares of which is a wetland. And part of that project was the need to have consent to divert a creek and reinstate a historic wetland. So my submission is around the costs for environmentally good projects or activities such as the creation of a wetland, and that there's an opportunity for this council to introduce a policy where fees for those costs are waived, insofar as often when creating an environmentally good outcome, there's no commercial benefit to the landowner or the applicant. I'm happy to table the policy around these issues that has been Environment Southland since 1999. To date, in the last year, or since July last year, there's the fees that have been waived amount to $20,868. There have been 5 applications that have been waived by the council. As I said, it's been in place since 1999, and I do appreciate there's been a sea change in the way farmers and other land users and landowners view their responsibilities for environmental outcomes. And so I'm assuming that projects such as the one we're about to complete and others similar will be more frequent in the future. And so my thoughts are that there's a great opportunity to allow this to happen at a zero consent cost, given that there's other significant costs to the landowner in completing such projects. The first part of my submission you have a copy of is that the actual costs of completing a consent, regardless of whether it's for environmentally good or not, are a little high. The elephant in the room, of course, is that the council have a monopoly over the cost of consents because an applicant hasn't got the choice of going anywhere else. Not to dwell too long on the consenting process that we've just been through, but we were surprised at the hourly rates and some of the delays or the time taken to achieve consent, and that the costs seemed a little high for what the outcome was. It's a bit of a sideline as far as my submission goes, but I just want to bring that to your notice, given that many applicants don't have the capacity to write a big fat cheque for a consent that is required, especially those that might have an environmental outcome and no commercial benefit, as I stated before. So that being the case, I would, we're speaking of a little corner in the southern area of Otago. We've both been involved in the Pomahaka Water Care Group, as many of you probably know. And so some of the water quality outcomes are often unique to the district, and we work on strategies such as setting up small wetlands or large ones, as the case may be, to improve significantly the water quality in a particular area. So on a regional basis, that you guys have got the responsibilities for, it's difficult for me to predict how many new applications there would be for this kind of thing. However, like I said, there's an opportunity to start here. Our neighbours in Southland have been going on this since 1999. It depends on whether you think it's too much of a burden or whether it's an opportunity. I would suggest the latter, and the time's now. That's my submission.
Councillor Calvert.
Two things. First is that you may be sort of aware in the background, or you may not, that the costs charged by the regional council, being a monopoly supplier and a government mandated supplier, are only allowed to be the actual and reasonable costs of something. They're not set to make a profit. And if you don't believe that what you're being charged is the actual and reasonable costs of a consent, get back to us.
Right.
So I'm just telling you that if you think we're set up to make a profit, we're not, and we're not allowed to be.
Okay. I guess somewhat the cynical nature of some farmers might conclude that if they're being charged $130 an hour for something that's out of their control, then they might think that that's probably a little bit too much.
Feel free to challenge, that's all I'm saying, because that's the rules.
I appreciate that.
Councillor Scott.
Sorry.
All right. Question.
If we were putting money aside for example, free consents for wetlands, which we've had some people wanting to do, how would you imagine that might work? Would you see it as a catchment group that already exists putting something forward, or I mean, there could be millions of wetlands. How would we?
Yes. Okay. Well, you guys would set the criteria, and they'll be on a case-by-case basis, I'm sure. What I'm keen to emphasise is that any applicant should be able to qualify as long as the threshold is clear where environmental good is the outcome and not so much a commercial benefit to the applicant. It could be an individual, a partnership, a trust, a company, a non-profit organisation or group such as a kitchen group. It should be available for anybody. But where the threshold is, that is a measure of, I guess, the nature of the outcome and how that is of benefit to the environment. That's, I guess, the sticking point, because if you suggest, okay, there could be, thousands, millions, however many around the place, then I would suggest some landowners might think, oh, if I put an environmental good part to my overall application and try and get it for nothing, well then that's clever, cunning, or not fair on other ratepayers.
It might be you're doing fencing and other things that contribute, and so long as the benefit of the consent part is less than the money you've spent.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, I think, a lot of environmental good outcomes don't need a consent.
Yeah.
They're permitted, or they're just common sense, or they're under the new rules. So, it's for the ones that need a consent, let's be quite clear. And for this one that we've just completed on the Valleys land, there's a diversion of a creek which services 1,100 hectares of land, the runoff area. So we're talking the movement of a fair bit of water, especially in flood events. I would like to think there's huge opportunity for similar types of diversions to occur. And for that, of course, you need a consent.
Thanks.
Councillor Scott was next, then Wilson.
Yeah, just quickly, thank you. Commend you for your work, for hanging in there through not an easy process. I put the question to Lloyd earlier today, and there's obviously the scope, as Hilary, as people are saying, it needs to be tight. But Lloyd suggested, like a fund in the order per annum of 50 to 70 grand for wetlands, community good, environmental good. Could you foresee that? Well, it doesn't necessarily have to pay for all the consent, but contribute to them, and just could you see that of being the scale? That's my question.
Oh, easily. It's it's what happens in 10 years' time. Once we've got a few more of these across the line, is probably the thing that is difficult to predict. But I'd sort of think, within the region, 5 to 20 in a year, and if each consent's going to cost between 3 and 10 grand, depending on the complexity of it, then that's the ballpark figure we need to be talking. Maybe 100k in a fund. And we've talked before about like a chairman's discretionary fund, or even applications under 36 AAA of the Resource Management Act, which is a targeted type of discretionary figure, more like a discount. But yeah, I think we're about there.
Thank you.
Possibly more, in the long term, if there's going to be more of these, and of course they reach that threshold, whichever
you know, wherever the line is set. There could be significantly more. I think the key thing is to get it started.
Councillor Wilson.
Kia ora. Thank you very, very much for what you've done. It's a great site and it's wonderful to see what's happening down there. Thank you. I just wonder if your case has made us, again, realise that we're just reacting rather than being proactive. And if we were looking at this in the eyes of Te Mana Atawai or where we need to go with FMUs and actually saying we have got a real need to do recreation of wetlands. That is the driver of a lot of the where stuff is going. And they're not particularly easy. I mean, your example, and getting in there and with a digger and doing what you've done would almost certainly require a resource consent in most cases, wouldn't it?
Not initially. Our plan B, if we couldn't achieve consent, was actually just have a series of ponds and take the high flow flood events from the creek and divert it that way without a consent.
Yeah, but in order to do...
Not going to drain there.
No, but if you want to get a wetlands, so if you want to develop a wetlands, which is where everything is telling us we should be recreating these for a whole lot of reasons, but in order to recreate what has been it's going to be a fabulous asset, shouldn't we be saying actually we have to enable this? And we're reacting. Well, if we're going to put money in there for people to react, we should actually be going out and saying, this is a policy. We want to get these put in. How do we get them and how do we prioritise where they go? Yeah. Because that's what we should be doing rather than reacting to applications coming in and trying to guess them.
Right.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
Yeah, please do.
Well, to me, you should just have an enabler. Somebody, the right person in all of Otago who's an enthusiast who wants to make it happen. As soon as he turns up with a farmer, there's a way you can do it that just by being positive.
He means or she.
Yeah, or she.
I've had to tell Howie off today already for that.
I think where Jerry's coming from and myself as well is that there's a huge opportunity here for the liaison team to have more of an effect. I would suggest the liaison team's a little small, significantly so. They have a great opportunity to promote and guide, coaching role maybe.
Any further questions? Thank you for your work. Thank you for putting a submission in, and thank you very much for taking the time to come and see us. Very much appreciated.
25th of June.
25th of June, 1 o'clock.
Stephen Jack.
Oh, you are certainly invited.
Somebody will be
just drawing up the invitations now. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ceremonial tree. Cool.
Well,
Put the.
It's a long night, is it?
Yes, it is.
Don't want to hang up on that.
Exactly what I had.
Well, I'm not sure. We've got a bit confused with stuff whether people are coming or going.
Craig heard a nice quote to him.
You can't get them out. No, that's the move, yeah. There you go.
G'day, Steve.
Crikey, what are you doing? What's he doing here?
Oh, many more boxes.
Sit down. Wait, yeah.
No, you can do them now, because hungry people start more.
I've got one more after this.
Has he brought his own baking?
No, this is the last supper. Oh, geez, I can turn you.
Yeah, the last supper, you don't need to.
This is the last supper before you killed you.
You're better off some to the Waipahi people over there.
Yeah, no worries, sounds good. Cheers.
Thank you very much. I'm not going to turn something that beautiful down.
Yeah, that's that process.
Wow.
Where did it live?
Alexa, enjoy the look.
You left in Otago.
You couldn't offer a couple to those guys.
I will, don't worry.
Thank you. Who are these from?
What am I enjoying?
It's good Otago.
An absolutely beautiful Otago lamb chop.
Lamb chops.
Oh,
Thank
well
you.
done.
Jesus. This looks amazing.
Is this bribery or not? We love this.
This is eat local.
I have to run away, people. I've got another meeting.
This is carbon neutral lamb.
Oh, good.
He biked here.
Sure.
Yeah, thank you. And free range.
Lovely.
Bad luck, Nick.
Yeah.
That's financial example, right?
Well, hungry people start wars, so that's what that's all about. Where do you want me
I
to?
love that. Just up
the
here.
end of here. Yep.
Then Nick can see your name.
So I guess I'm just here.
Take a seat, and I'll let you. We'll just kick you off on one.
Oh, I see.
Yeah. Just don't panic. We're not over formal, but so we individual submitters will give you a good 4 minutes. We'll give you a wee bell, another minute to tidy up. Then we'll ask you some questions. So if you could just introduce yourself, where you're from, and what you're about, that would be awesome. And thanks very much indeed for your submission. And thanks very much for turning up today. Very much appreciated.
Okay. No.
It is. It just doesn't. It has it light off. Doesn't show its light.
Okay.
Yeah, that's very annoying.
It's all good.
That should be good.
Okay. Hi guys. My name's Stephen Jack. I'm from South Otago. I'm a farmer and a forester and a conservator and like a bit of biodiversity. And I guess I'm here really to heighten your awareness around this whole carbon forestry. I actually think it should be called carbon mining. It's going to transform Otago and indeed New Zealand. The numbers are frightening. They really are. To remain competitive as sheep farmers, we're going to need somewhere in the order of $275 a lamb if the carbon price goes to $50. So lamb's currently around $110, give or take. It's pretty steady. Meat companies have got their affairs in order, and things are looking relatively bright there in that sphere. Carbon price is currently around $37, but we've probably lost 53,000 stock units in South Otago in the last year and a bit, with more to come. There's been one very large property, probably one of the bigger ones in South Otago, the Wisp. It's recently reportedly sold to a Dutch family firm to be planted in permanent carbon forestry. So I don't know if any of you know the Wisp or know of it, but it's a pretty cool place, and there's a lot of scrub on it. So I'm not sure if there is anything the ORC can do around that. I would suggest, and I gave this suggestion to the Clutha District Council, you've probably had a lot of people asking for a lot of different things today, and they all require money. I would suggest hoisting the rates on these forestry companies. In 60 years' time, once these permanent carbon forests have done their dash, they've sequestered carbon, they've reached maturity, they're starting to hit decline. A lot of these are going to be shell companies. They're probably going to be wound up, folded up, and there'll be no chance for redress against them to help tidy these places up. So in 60 years' time, you're going to be faced with a big bill, if not before, for firefighting and remediation. And I don't think you'd be giving a gold mining licence for a 60-year gold mining concession without some means of remediating the land at the end of it. So I guess in some ways I'm a bit silly as a farmer being here. I should just plant the farm and take the money and run and go and sit on the beach with every other farmer. But it's going to have a massive impact on communities as well. 53,000 stock units, beef and lamb supplied numbers, and it's just around the meat component. But they're saying 3 jobs are created directly and indirectly per 1,000 stock units. So 53,000 stock units times 3, you're not that silly, you can do the maths. And this is just the start. It really is. This is the start of the gold rush, and this is a bit like Black Peter finding gold. This is seriously just the start, and it could have a massive impact on Otago.
Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. You are a forester, you said yourself.
Yes, we've got forestry.
Can you explain to me what sort of forestry you've got and where you plant that forestry?
We've got pines, macrocarpus, eucalypts. It's interesting, I was just looking through some documents this afternoon, and the timber price today is about the same price it was in 1997. When I studied forestry at Lincoln, timber prices historically rose at 1% above the rate of inflation. They haven't done that in the last 30 years. So I don't anticipate them doing it in the future either. So
I just wanted to understand why your forestry, and it's not a trick question, is better than their forestry, and how you do it that's different.
I'm not saying our forestry is. Probably forestry's been quite a disappointment for us in the returns, and that we'd anticipated a rising log price over time. 1% over 30 years is quite a bit. So it hasn't happened. We've planted in the steeper, darker faces, but they also have some of the best biodiversity and some of the coolest stuff going on. They're also bloody good shelter in a storm.
Yeah. So it's in balance with your farm
it
operation.
is, yes. And there's been mistakes in planting, but yeah, some things we've got right. So yeah.
And your experience of regeneration under pine?
Oh, there's zero. Yeah. No. No one can walk through a pine forest and say there's active regeneration going on. It's not until that pine forest starts falling down, be it through a windstorm or something, or just age. Sometimes you'll see some seriously old stands that are falling over, and then you start getting a bit of stuff come through, but chances are it's going to be pines.
Do you think there's a place for farmers to be actively going for the carbon credits that these guys are chasing, but with regenerative bush in your area in replacing some of that forestry?
Oh, I see the whole chasing carbon on land as a real folly.
You talked about the marine stuff.
Yes. There was a chap, Professor Philip Boyd, he was at the Otago University here. He won the Prime Minister's Science Prize about 2005, 2006. That's a $500,000 prize. And that prize, he'd taken a team from Otago University and on board Tangaroa, which is Niwa's ship. They'd gone into the Southern Ocean. I have a nutrient background as well. I worked 6 years for Ravensdown, so this stuff's really familiar to me. The Southern Ocean is a high nutrient, low chlorophyll ocean. So it's got all the nutrients required for life in abundance, except for one micronutrient. So it's like buying a farm with Olsen peas of 50 and fantastic nitrogen levels and you name it, but it's missing one micronutrient. So they released 3.5 tonne of iron sulfate. The micronutrient that's missing is a very abundant one around Earth, and it's iron. So they released 3.5 tonne of iron sulfate into the Southern Ocean, and NASA satellites tracked the resulting phytoplankton bloom that emanated from it. And it got up to 500,000 hectares before they lost it. So they were able to track it. From that, he deduced, and there's a science paper in Nature, that they could probably sequester carbon for about $2 US a tonne. So when you think about the risks associated with carbon forestry, carbon mining on land versus the opportunity that's in the Southern Ocean and other oceans around the world, the Australians are working on a project using phosphate and nitrogen in their more tropical waters to stimulate a similar effect. So the idea is that once that phytoplankton moves through, and if you can maintain the food web, so through from phytoplankton to zooplankton, on up the food plate to krill and whales and other sea life, once that at every step, when that plant and animal life dies, and if it sinks below 1,000 metres below sea level, they're saying that carbon will be gone for thousands of years. So it's a massive opportunity, and I think it's one that is very relevant to New Zealand and one that we've just completely overlooked.
Wow. These guys get, when they do planting jobs and in-kind contributions, they get paid $26 an hour for projects instead of the 130. That's how it works.
When Kevin and others actually brought to our attention the carbon farming issue in North Otago, it seemed to me to be a pretty straightforward issue. It's potentially in a dry catchment. Whereas in your catchment, the WISP, it actually isn't dry at this point. Maybe it will be after your forestry. But so isn't this essential? So like all I'm saying is, I just wonder how it would ever be combated, what you're talking about. But isn't it a central government issue? Isn't it the only place you're going to get wheels? They're driving this.
Yes, and I don't think, like, they could tell us to drive red cars tomorrow and we'd all have to. They've got such a mandate.
Yeah.
So, and they've sold the story that carbon is fixed in trees and everyone's gone along with it. And it's sort of the tyranny of democracy, if you like. So to change the political will, you need to change the voter base. And I think that's where the real struggle is. And you guys have probably got a bit of a chance to put a wee bit of a handbrake on it for a little while and perhaps have government here, I don't know. But I noticed Marian's not here, so I had to dust up with her and Clutha last time. So.
Oh, you did too. I remember that. Yeah. But it's not a dry catchment. So how are we going to do it? How are we going to put?
It's got nothing to do with it being dry.
Yeah.
It's the effect on the community.
Yeah.
South Otago's are predominantly it's servicing the rural community, the rural industries. The biggest employer is the freezing works. Gee, at $275 a lamb, Jared's probably thinking, geez, I've got a bit of bloody dairy ground that could go on a few more trees, you know. This is, yeah.
A question from Councillor Moon.
Isn't it fair to say, and I get where you're coming from, and I grow trees on my property, plantation forestry, etc., and I've got native bush protected, etc. But isn't it fair to say, if you take, say, South and West Otago, the growing index for Pinus radiata is probably as good as anywhere in the country, apart from maybe parts of the North Island. So predominantly, you know, that's where trees have grown well in the past and will grow well in the future. So the right tree in the right place.
The whole thing's a folly. You've got Huntley pumping out 500,000 tonne of carbon dioxide a month. You have the likes of Kapuni. I was talking to the CEO of Balance the other day. For Kapuni, where they produce urea for agriculture, well, I don't know what they produce now, but it was about 1 million tonne. But he said for them to become carbon neutral, they would need to be planting about 18,000 hectares in trees. So this is just a couple of the big emitters in New Zealand. New Zealand is tiny, as you know. When you start getting those overseas guys coming in, and they are, that's when we're in trouble.
Yeah, the land use change is going to be significant.
Yes.
But I think surely it's not even central government issue. It goes further than that. It goes to the Paris Agreement.
It does, yeah.
Because they see carbon as the solution, or carbon credits as part of the solution to mitigate against emissions.
Yes. So we've been caught in the crossfire big time.
Yeah. Can I just ask, I'll go to Councillor, just so 53,000 stock units, so that's 159 jobs. So if you assume that half of those were families, and say we had 50 kids that all of a sudden had to move out of the area because their parents didn't have jobs, so what would that do to Koitangata, Clinton, Clutha Valley schools?
Oh, yeah. I think the answer's pretty obvious.
Councillor Deaker.
Yeah, Stephen, you're a good thinker. If phytoplankton's the answer.
I'm not saying it's the answer, I'm saying it's part of the solution.
I've heard you talk about that before, and I get more compelled by it every time I hear you describe it. How come that so few people are talking about that? How come it's just not happening?
Oh, I don't know. Perhaps it's popular politics, or goodness knows. It's yeah. He did. I think Philip Lloyd. He had trouble in demonstrating the carbon moving down through the sea profile, going from air level or sea level to that 1,000 metres below sea level, and you can understand it. I mean, it's a biological system, and when and if people do start playing with it, I'm sure they'll get it wrong. It's going to take time to get it right, but yeah.
We'll go to a question from Councillor Calvert, but we still have one Zoom submitter online, so Not trying to rush things. I'm just saying that. Yeah.
Do you have any idea how much carbon is currently being sequestered in the sea around New Zealand?
Oh, look, around New Zealand, it's probably not a lot because, well, it's out past the continental shelf where it counts. So if you look at if you see green water and life, you can assume that there is there's photosynthesis, phytoplankton being produced, and you've got a food web operating.
I'm just imagining if we go out and say New Zealand includes our waters.
Yes.
Could we say, oh, well, job done, we've got enough carbon sequestered?
That's a good point. I wouldn't know.
In which case, let's be careful about the trees because we've already got enough. Now
I do wonder if it's a bit like the native forest. You know, Helen Clark said, "Oh, we don't need to worry about signing up to Kyoto because we've got all these native forests, we've got all these national parks. We're going to be fine for carbon." Well, actually, those parks don't sequester any carbon at all. They're a carbon sink.
Yep.
But the level of carbon isn't increasing over time. They're decaying as fast as they're growing. So they're what's classified as a biologically
neutral.
They're biologically mature forests.
So we'd have to increase whatever's in the sea.
Yes, and that might be problematic.
Correct.
Stephen, look, thank you very much indeed for your for what you've done.
No, thank you.
Councillor Hobbs is lobbying very hard along this very vein at the moment, so you'll be pleased to hear that.
Yes.
We have ongoing works on this very subject that we're lobbying hard with immediately. Thanks very much for taking the time, and thanks very much indeed for turning up. Thank you. And the chops. And the chops.
$275, it'll bloody hurt me next time.
Well, pass on your best wishes to Marion too.
Well,
Are there any chops left over? We'll give her one tomorrow. Thank you, guys.
Okay, so
Shane.
we've got one. So we're on the page 290 of 410. We're to Neil Cullen, who's coming in on Zoom.
From the Kittens.
We're going down to the heartland. We're slowly getting to the heartland of this process.
Can we, when he's...
Neil's
Kia ora.
connecting.
You there, Neil?
Oh, still.
Still working? You there, Neil? You got me?
It says connecting.
Connecting.
So, we might just take a minute for his audio to
sound.
To sing, hopefully.
How are we going, Neil? Not yet.
Oh, it says still connecting.
Still connecting.
This is another forest. This is a forester.
Still coming.
Still coming.
I think if
Sure, at least we can see. We can see Neil.
We can see. Can you talk?
It says it just says it's connecting to audio.
Right. You can zap him.
There we go.
You got me, Neil?
Oh, can you hear us, Neil?
You there, Neil?
He muted.
He did a really good submission.
nothing.
We're not doing predator stuff down south.
So I wonder, Neil, if he turned his video off and just talked and see if that would work. Sometimes.
Can you nod if you can hear us, Neil? If we've.
No, nothing.
No.
Did I not?
No. I've sent a message.
I should type that to him.
We would have taken that as a vote.
Check his audio.
Yep.
This is frustrating.
In Queenstown, can you still hear us?
Yeah, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes. Okay.
Is he getting your message?
Here he is. He's looking at his computer now.
He's looking.
You there, Neil?
Turn up your sound.
Can we ring him? Just ring him on a phone or something.
We
haven't got the numbers. There's no details for us
Asking
to
for a number.
follow this man. Have you got his phone number?
Do you know his number, guys?
Neil Cullen. The Catlins.
There's more than one phone down that way.
Party line. Well, you'd have to be his landline because you don't get people on cell phones.
I
don't
used
you?
to live in Clinton, so that's, I understand.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was.
Yeah. Or tell yeah.
Okay, I've just messaged him asking for his number.
Oh, cool.
And I'm seeing if I can find it. Is he?
So when I made that comment before, when you do in-kind contributions and you have to account for that with some of your projects, what are you allowed to charge yourselves out at? Do you know? Yeah. You don't, oh, some of those grant systems.
I don't know what, I think it's about $50 an hour.
50, okay.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
You'd have to ask that.
Yeah.
Dangerous ground if you look at a solicitor charging me at $300 an hour. Well,
If I knew that at Plan Change 7, but I'm not allowed to say that.
You would never have got yourself into that bother in the first place.
I should have gone home when I should have gone home.
But he's more value to you than a consent staff.
Certainly, we're still online. We're still online.
Sorry, he hasn't given us.
No.
No.
Right.
Can I, Andrew?
My friend's father was a conservative forest bird at Targa South a long time ago. Tree growth rate was 2,500 feet in Hawke's Bay, it's 1,200 feet in South.
Right. Oh, wow.
Not as good as you think.
Okay. Okay.
You say that again?
Right.
Twice,
Yep.
twice what it is.
What about West Otago?
2.5 to 1,200.
Oh, big words, yeah.
Are you ready?
And Central Otago?
Just had Mort Shepherd. This is online, isn't it? Yep. I'll talk to you later.
The density comes into it too.
Could we?
Well, the
It's not that
density
straightforward.
is ridiculous because you don't hit the canopy.
No, but the faster it grows, it reflects on the density and the how.
Oh, the wood. I'm
Yeah.
talking about the density of the planting for carbon forests. Doesn't make sense to me.
Yeah.
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 It's really close.
Switched them beforehand. You go back to there.
What's carbon?
But it grows slower because it's so dense. So what?
No, they grow, the wood in the North Island has a higher density.
Yeah.
North, Nelson North.
Yeah.
But you're talking planting density.
Yeah.
So there's still planting 1,000, 1,200 stems to be not in those.
Yeah. But down, yeah. If you're trying to sequester carbon, don't you have to have the leaf
I
matter?
would think you'd be better going for a lower stock rate, but I
Yeah.
wanted to.
I reckon the Chinese market, you're better to go to 600 because they take everything down to 10 centimetre log.
So we're not talking forestry now. We're talking for carbon. Yeah.
But
yeah.
The sweet spot is 600 stems per hectare
Yeah.
to get a
message
log that's marketable, and obviously if you register for carbon credits.
To 8:35 tomorrow
If you
morning.
want to hit the sweet spot between having a plantation forest and collect your carbon.
And-
I don't think you'll be cutting trees down in the future. You won't be able to afford it. You've got to pay 80%.
You're setting us up for running late all morning, Ben.
No, we're not.
No.
No,
That's
we're
all right, I don't
Yeah.
I'm hoping he's getting the messages.
Yeah.
Oh.
Got a number, have you?
Oh, cool. Well done. I've got a Neil Cullen in England.
Yep.
And you got a phone number?
Here we go.
It would have been useful to have the telephone numbers, wouldn't it?
Yeah, probably would.
Or email addresses.
What's this number?
So 027.
Sorry.
Yeah, there was a few practical things there that.
Thank you for telling us what happened today, tomorrow, in advance. We appreciate that.
Expect to see you in the morning. Yeah, good on you.
Thank you.
Can you just tell everyone that you got the rates rise wrong and it's not? It's not the right percentage?
No, it's actually per adult in the household, so it's more complicated than that.
Neil, Kevin, Malcolm, RC, how you going?
No, did you know what they did?
Yeah, there must
They
be
copied
a
the
seagull
New Zealand
sitting on
Herald
the line or
percentage and they,
something.
New Zealand Herald got it
Get
wrong.
this technology
They were saying there was a 32%
how
increase.
would you be
Neil?
Neil?
Oh, he's still got. No, he's just.
No.
Did you just?
Neil, if you can hear us, can you just make sure that your microphone's enabled at your end through the Zoom link?
Oh.
Can't hear you.
It's possible.
Got me?
Can you hear us?
No.
No. Yeah,
Okay.
so I'll ring him back.
Yep, I'm turning the mics off in the chamber.